Key D.
You know, the Aces and Eights was one of the most controversial factions of all time, and regularly divides opinion amongst the fans. The storyline lasted an entire year and a half, and featured loads of members under masks who were invading TNA. Nobody knew who any of them were, and the invasion started with a lot of buzz. However, as the members revealed themselves, the faction went downhill, and what started off as a good storyline was killed by the performers and the booking. So here today, we are going to grade all the individual Aces and Eights members, and let's see how they rank up. Taz, F. Joined the Aces and Eights after turning heel at Bully Ray and Hogan's wedding. He said he did it because why wouldn't he? And wanted to answer to a Howa Power. Played the role of a heel commentator for the group. This obnoxious Oompa Loompa made me want to run down to the commentary desk every week and flatten him. At first he took it seriously and played the role of a spokesman for the group. But as the angle rolled on, you could tell Taz was getting bored. He would often make fun of the X Division nerds past the point of just being a heel and just flat out burying them instead. He would shout and ramble over wrestlers' entrances and mispronounce their names deliberately and just sit there laughing at it. Damn son, if you ever watched TNA on one of the one night only pay-per-views, he was just messing around like a little kid. I don't know how he got away with it for so long. What on earth was Dixie paying him for? To think he replaced Don West. No wrestler ever came down to the desk to get him, for God's sake. They're supposed to be an invading faction hiding somewhere in the back, but one of the ringleaders is just sat at the announcing desk every week commentating. They're plotting to end your careers and do you guys serious damage, you idiots. Go and get him. But no one ever would get their revenge on him due to his neck problems in real life. Taz said his contract covered him if anyone ever touched him, and they would be in massive trouble. And that he was bulletproof. Teflon Taz, small and orange like crabs. Devon D. Devon was the first member to be unmasked and started a trend of disappointing reveals in the faction. It was a great angle because no one knew who was under the mask and fans were hoping for some new stars to be coming into TNA. But each reveal was one sad old man after the next. Devon was given the title of Sergeant at Arms, which I guess meant he was third in charge after the Vice President and the President? I don't know, none of this was ever explained to us, for God's sake. What was interesting was Devon was one of the only members to hold a title during this time, as they were all losers and couldn't win any matches to win a belt in the first place. Devon held the worthless TV title for pretty much his whole run of the Aces and Eights. After beating Samoa Joe, he would keep the title for 178 days, rarely defending it. He would eventually lose the title to Abyss, and then would be pinned in a 5-on-5 match by AJ Styles where the loser would have to leave TNA. He's not been seen in the company since this angle. What's interesting is he actually had a really long run with the TV title before this, about 2 years before, but he left the company without defending the belt. So Devon Dudley certainly has a bit of history with the TV title. The whole TV title situation was a strange one, it's definitely a video for another day. Garrett Bischoff, D. Forget Sons of Anarchy, this is Son of Eric. He had been a referee and a wrestler in TNA for a couple of years before this storyline began. He'd been part of a loser tag team with Devon Dudley prior to this and didn't really have any direction to his career. As the Aces and Eights story began, he was fighting for the TNA side, but then he turned heel on Kurt Angle in a steel cage match, revealing himself and Wes Briscoe to be in cahoots. Garrett was just another pointless member in the group and was just used as a punching bag by the TNA roster. He was completely useless, and I generally have no idea what any of his moves were apart from punches and kicks. He would usually be the one to take the pinfall in matches, and he just looked like a nervous wreck whenever the camera was focused on him. He couldn't cut a promo, he didn't look intimidating, and he was eventually kicked out of the group. He'd never be seen again in TNA, despite being listed on their roster page for the whole of next year. Garrett was supposed to be one of the breakout stars in the group. What a load of rubbish. Nex C. One of the few members of the group that I think was actually a good fit. That's not endorsing his hiring from WWE, by the way. I thought he sucked in WWE as Mike Knox. And he continued to suck in TNA as Nux with the Aces and Eights and with the Menagerie. Admittedly, this scruffy looking nutcase looked like he would belong in a biker faction, and don't say I'm being racist to bikers. Nux was in the Aces and Eights pretty much the whole time, debuting under a mask and attacking the TNA roster. He would eventually be unmasked and then lose his debut match to the Stinger. And this is pretty much how the rest of his time in the company would go, losing. He could potentially be classed as even more pointless than some of the other bodies in the faction, as he had no star potential, no wrestling talent and no promo skills. However, I'm going to grade him a little bit higher than some of the other previously mentioned Aces and Eights members, As the faction was drawing to a close and the infighting had begun, he became the voice of reason amongst the remaining members and actually cut some decent promos. A feud could have actually worked between Bully Ray and Nox. The fans were actually cheering Nox for a bit. Unfortunately, it all ended just after this, with none of the remaining members actually getting a shot to take Bully Ray down. Doc D. Another wrestler who certainly fit the biker image. This dude looked like a long-lost Harris brother, except more miserable. He wrestled as Luke Gallows in the WWE, where he did nothing of note. He continued to do nothing of note in TNA. Doc stood for Director of Chaos, although I'm not sure if anybody actually knew what this was supposed to mean. He was known for hitting wrestlers with a hammer. Who does he think he is, the damn game? He was decent when he had a mask on, but once he lost it, it all went downhill. He had no promo time and was just completely pointless. He did challenge Mr. Anderson for the position of Vice Presidency through an over-the-top rope battle royal match, but this was the only time he stood up for himself and did anything of note. After being eliminated by Anderson, he left TNA. What a sore loser. Mike. Mike? Who's Mike, you say? What a great name for a professional wrestler. I'm going to give him A+. How could you not remember Mike? He was one of the key members of the Aces and Eights. He does need to go and hit the gym and eat some steak stick, man. Otherwise, he was the perfect member of the group. I'm just kidding. He was only actually on the show briefly, where he was captured and interrogated by Austin Aries into giving information about the Aces and Eights. He was punished by the arm breaker of the Aces and Eights for almost leaking information and hit in the head with a hammer. He was never seen again and is presumed dead. There was also an old fat man who once delivered threats to Hogan at the very start of the storyline, and he kept telling him, "We're not cowards," over and over again. This was actually his only appearance on the show, so I'm assuming after this Taz and Delo Brown just ate him. Anderson C.
Cederson.
Original Anderson did his own thing and fought against the Aces and Eights. However, the group was lacking star power as most of the group was still masked, and Anderson was invited into the group. He would later become the vice president after Delo Brown left. I never really felt like Anderson was a good fit in the faction. The whole time he looked like he couldn't be bothered and had a Kevin Nash in WCW vibe about him. He caused quite a lot of infighting in the group, and in storylines he was certainly responsible for the Aces and Eights' downfall, and eventually completely ended up killing the whole faction. He would be kicked out of the Aces and Eights after losing to Bully Ray in a Falls Count Anywhere match, but would get his revenge a couple of months later when he beat Bully Ray with the stipulation the Aces and Eights would have to disband. Not an awful member, and was certainly relevant, but he just wasn't a great fit for a biker faction, and he didn't really need the rub of being the one to beat Bully Ray and disband the Aces and Eights. Next, Bully Ray, A+. The leader of the group, he managed to remain a secret for a long time, although much of the internet speculated at the time it was going to be him. His story arc was well thought out and played out over the course of a year. Admittedly, not everything that happened made sense, but it was good for the most part. He had helped Hogan fight the Aces and Eights for a long time, but then started dating Hogan's talentless daughter Brooke. He then fought to win Hulk Hogan's trust by battling against the Aces and Eights. Eventually, he wound up in a world title match against Hardy in a cage at Lockdown. He won the title, turning heel, and revealed himself as the leader of the Aces and Eights. Okay, so he wrestled his own men for months, beating them and breaking them, just so down the line he could get a shot at the world title? Why would they agree to that? Anyway, Bully really was great once he became the unmasked leader and really came into his own as a heel. He had some great matches and carried himself like a star. People doubted if he could be a main event player before this. To be fair to Bully Ray, he also got in the best shape of his career for the world title run. The only downside of Bully Ray's run as leader of Aces and Eights was who he lost the title to. Now, I haven't marked him down for this as it's not really his fault, but in a real who's who quiz question, he actually lost the title to Chris Sabin. There was a lot of uproar on the internet about this at the time, but then he would gain the title back from Chris Sabin eventually, and then go on to lose it to AJ Styles. After this, there was an amazing segment where the main event Mafia held a funeral for the Aces and Eights. At the end of the funeral, Bully Ray burst through the door in a hoodie and threatened Anderson, which would lead to a blow-off casket match which Bully would again lose. There was also a strange segment around this time where Bully Ray was quoting Coolio. The Bully Ray rapping gimmick was never followed up on after this. Tito Ortiz, F. The worst debut in TNA history, completely embarrassing, no mic skills and didn't do anything at all. TNA was forced to bring Tito in the promotion as he would be fighting Quinton Jackson in Bellator. Quinton Jackson had also been brought into TNA and was positioned in the main event Mafia, so the two factions would feud. On Tito's debut, he came out to low-budget porno music and stood around with his arms folded for what seemed like 5 minutes. During this, they panned to the wrestlers for their reactions and most looked confused or bored. Anderson scratched his head. Tito didn't really get in the ring because Spike were worried he would injure himself and jeopardise the MMA match, so he did literally nothing but follow Bully Ray around for a few weeks. He was made the sergeant in arms after Devon left, but as I've already established, that didn't really mean anything. TNA wasted months building up to the Tito Ortiz v Rampage feud, and in the end it didn't even happen. What a waste of time. Tito looks like a gone-off spud, and I really resented having to watch him on my TV. Brooke C. Brooke became Bully Ray's first lady in the group. This was also a massive swerve to everyone because they thought Brooke Hogan would be turning heel and joining the Aces and Eights. But Bully actually kicked her to the curb and said the real Brooke he was dating was Brooke Tessmarker. See what he did there? Anyway, she barely did anything and just followed Bully around as arm candy. It would have been cool to see how the other knockouts reacted to her being in the Aces and Eights, but nothing ever happened. Best thing about her were the Ho chants, which gave me flashbacks to Stephanie McMahon in the Attitude Era. Wes Briscoe F. Briscoe was the greasiest member of the club, and he was supposed to be one of the other young breakout stars, but he was just a joke. He could barely even speak, let alone wrestle. He came into the company as a friend of Kurt Angle and got in through the TNA gut check where he had to face Garrett Bischoff, and then was helped to a contract by Delo Brown, who had been a judge that night. He then turned heel on Kurt Angle and joined the Aces and Eights. He joined because he was insulted at Briscoe having to start from the bottom and blamed Hawk Hogan, the Birdman brother. It was clear from Wes's long hair that he had been one of the masked members for a long time prior to this, so his beginning with the company was well thought out, but there was no plan to get him over. He had a one-on-one cage match with Kurt Angle and he actually won the match, but this match did nothing for Wes and most viewers just writ him off after the match. He had no right to beat Kurt Angle in a cage. He would often team as Garrett Bischoff in what has to go down as one of the worst tag teams of all time, and although they challenged for the TNA tag straps a couple of times, they just weren't good enough to win it. He would never win any singles matches either after this, and just like many of the other members, I have no idea what his finisher actually was. Eventually Bully Ray kicked him out of the faction for being too much of a loser, and Wes didn't actually want to leave the group, as his face swelled up and filled with tears live on TV. Ivelisse Velez, no. She wrestled one match as an honorary member of the Aces and Eights on a one-night only pay-per-view that no one even saw. What was the point? Delo Brown, F. He'd been in the backstage segments for TNA for years leading up to this. He was often seen out back working as an agent and would often be sent out to break up the fights amongst the wrestlers. He was cool 15 years ago, but now he just looked like a cab driver. TNA started running a new segment called Gut Check, where new wrestlers would have a match in an attempt to win a contract with TNA. They would then face off against a panel of 3 judges who were all TNA employees. Originally Al Snow was a judge, but then it was revealed that Delo Brown date raped Al Snow. Yes, he date raped Al Snow's drink and sent him to hospital, and then Delo was able to take Al's spot as a judge on the show, and he gave a yes vote to Wes Briscoe, who was competing for a TNA contract. This got one of the Aces and Eights members in the door. It was later revealed that Delo was actually the vice president of the Aces and Eights. This was completely pointless because following the gut check segment, Delo did absolutely nothing of note and it wasn't clear why he was in the faction. He actually had a terrible I Quit match against Kurt Angle where he lost, and showed that he clearly was not in ring shape anymore. He was punished for losing the match by the Aces and Eights and was stripped of his vice presidency. Bit harsh there, boys. It was his first match in 4.5 years and it was against Kurt Angle, for God's sake. Brown eventually faded out of the storyline and he was no more than a pointless extra body in the group who could no longer wrestle a proper match. It's been revealed in interviews that he was never actually supposed to be a member of the Aces and Eights. He was just asked to fill in a couple of times by Eric Bischoff in some of the mass segment attacks. So there we have it, Aces and Eights were a faction of scrubs, and the only one who performed well was Bully Ray. The rest were average to poor, and what started off as a great idea died the second the masks came off, and the fans realised there was not going to be a massive reveal of an ex-WWE star jumping ship to TNA. So I know you all agreed with me on that. Aces and Eights was a complete waste of time. So make sure you subscribe for more content like this and drop a comment down below. I'm out.